is our fourth track today at day one of truLondon, and we're focusing on direct sourcing versus outsourcing. And we have a mixture of direct sources in the room, outsourcing providers, and those that have a more in-house background. My first question relates to the title of the track, interestingly enough, because I think that direct sourcing versus outsourcing, for me, they're one and the same thing. So maybe there's a principle that we need to set for the group that says, would you do one or the other? And any thoughts that we can get around that? Because my thought is outsourcing is direct sourcing. So why would we be making that comparison? Anybody have any offers on that?
In a way, it feels the same. I think it's different, really.
Okay.
Yeah. I think if you outsource something, then the same thing about it is that it's all involving a third party. Both. The only thing is that if you outsource it, usually you can take it away as well from the company to the other company, so you don't do it in-house anymore. While with direct sources, you usually get the sources in-house to do the work for you, and I think that the difference is there.
Okay.
I think the second difference is probably the capability of what an RPO will do versus direct sourcing. Generally, there's a capability around the process, their systems, their technology, and ideally their track record and how they've done this before.
So it involves more than
and maybe even their knowledge base.
Right.
That they've seen this, they've done this with 10 other companies, so they're actually going to leverage their lessons learned, mistakes they've made before. Whereas direct sourcing could be incredibly good sourcers, but they may never have done it in this company or a different company before.
But do you lose a cultural affinity with the company when you outsource it?
Yes. I think there's different degrees to outsourcing, isn't there? Some organisations would look at it very much as a strategic partnership where that outsourcing part is really integrated with them, almost to an extent of being an internal direct sourcing function. Others are more remote in their approach, and therefore that will create connotations within both the business and the customer in terms of to what extent it feels outsourced or not. So I think it can be two and the same thing, or depending on how the customer and indeed the vendor approaches things, it can feel quite distinct as well.
Is there a concern though when companies often outsource things that they see as non-core, so peripheral items, cleaning, IT,
Exactly.
Stuff like that gets outsourced?
I think,
Should acquisition of talent be one of those things that you outsource? Because it actually
not.
Yeah, well, that's one concern I have.
Most comes out to outsource the recruitment because it's a peripheral. I think they outsource it because they haven't got capability of delivering on it.
Okay.
I think that's two very different arguments. If you're not capable of doing on it, if you can't, generally recruitment is done by HR people who are not necessarily the best qualified to deliver various recruitment activities for them. Whereas when they do come to an outsourcing company, they have the benefit of our expertise, and we have to learn about that culture of their business, which is you can do that fairly quickly. No matter what organisation it is, you spend enough time with that organisation, you start to live and believe their values, as long as you're with your own RPO company.
I think an unfortunate legacy really of the RPO name, and certainly the word having outsourcing in it, does imply outsourcing can equal, at least historically, non-core. We tend to use a word that's more preferred in terms of partnering or implying something that's more of a type of consulting relationship. If you look at how consulting businesses per se engage with client organisations, what they're doing with them is absolutely strategic, can be advising on a strategy or things that are really core and central to their business. So if you look at it as though you're a partner in a consulting role per se, rather than an outsourcing function, you have a very different connotation to the customer and how they perceive it.
If we can go back to your point, so I think hopefully it's on film that you said never happened.
I think it's really strategic.
And I understand that, and I actually think that one of the things we need to be clear about when we look at the reason I'm saying direct sourcing and outsourcing for me are the same is that outsourcers will be in the market as you, recruiting direct.
Yeah.
So and outsource doesn't mean offsite. So in the end, do you do it well or not is the important part. But what you're saying, I fully agree with, that it has to be a strategic directive as part of the overall business plan to get great people. And then the how you do it becomes, and I think that's back to your point of core or non-core. If you're saying, I'm broadly happy with my process, I'd just like someone else to do it cheaper, That's very different to
That's
building
another
a
argument
partner.
to do it.
Exactly,
Right.
but but there's also we're in an environment now where it's not necessarily high volume. It needs to be done really slickly, really in a really sophisticated way. And I guess I would say to you, if you're an in-house recruiter, if there was a partner there who you could get the best sources in the marketplace working as you on your behalf, would that be attractive versus feeling like you're handing off your whole strategy to someone else?
But then you take it in a different way, and then you really are saying that it is strategic and that it is core for your business, and then you probably just find the best people to do that for you.
The interesting thing about outsourcing or doing it direct is that companies tend to do this for a while, and then they go back to doing it direct. And I come from both a RPO background as well as direct. There has to be an additional value to outsource it versus doing it direct. And the problem with, from where I've seen it, is that there hasn't been that additional value. I was in an organization that was supplying to Microsoft, and I had, I think, 4 or 5 people above me as an operational daily recruiter or source or whatever you want to call it, that had to be paid and to be, was part of the process. But there wasn't really any additional value. And the organization, the end client, saw that and realized that there wasn't really any reason for continuing this relationship, and subsequently ended.
I think it also depends on where or why the client's wanting to engage with an RPO partner. If they've got a quite a messy situation, for want of a better word, and they don't have the expertise, an RPO is a quick way to build that capability, potentially with a view to transition it in-house at a point in time. We see that as a potentially good outcome for
Which can be quite tricky, I think, because you already start to engage with candidates and to start building your network and getting to know who is out there for you, and then you at some point transfer that to.
Yeah, but it depends how that transition happens. So one, usually it's a period of years rather than months, and secondly, in the most part, it is the existing capability that's been provided by the provider essentially will transition to the customer in a smooth transition, so it won't be kind of swapping out one team for another. But I think in situations where I've seen RPO being of less value to a customer is where they've already got a very well-defined strategy, model, process and underpinning technology, and they're almost looking for an RPO provider to effectively provide contract recruiters. There's little value added in that context, and the broader expertise or consulting value which the RPO can bring is not something the customer either values or is willing to pay for. In those instances, it tends to be.
I would see, in the main, from all the RPOs I've seen, their biggest strength is their process efficiency. And that's what they come in and do. They take a process that's poor, everything from the invoicing to the PO process to how many agencies you're dealing with, how much in-house you're doing, and they improve that.
So you mean that the argument would be costs then?
Yeah, but it's also, it does help branding as well, because if the process is better and people are seen quicker and everybody gets responded to, that can all be process as well. And that might have all just, they might have a graduate website that no one's even responding to. Yeah. So there's more than just process. It does improve the brand. I would struggle to see the strategic side. I'm not saying the outsource provider doesn't want the strategy side. I'd struggle to see actually that happening, because, as I said, firstly, it never ends up being a 20-year deal because things come and go. And secondly, the fact is the RPO provider are in there based on a number of metrics, because they are absolutely measured to an inch of their life. That's one of the things they've said they do. We're going to do cost per hire, we're going to do time per hire, we're going to lower your price per hire, and all of those, whether you like it or not, are not completely linked with long-term strategic talent management. But I would absolutely not say that's a criticism of an RPO, because I don't think the business ever asks for that. If you can actually give them the process efficiencies and save them 40% in cost, and improve their brand just from the basics of getting back to people on a regular basis, and then eventually even transition that back to the company. That's an incredibly positive thing you've done.
I think it depends where the customer's coming from as well, because some of those basic metrics can be met in one of two ways. So, for example, taking a process view of it, reducing the cost and improving the time, etc., by making it more efficient, but also by actually helping the organisation step up and integrate the recruiting per se with the broader talent management capability, and actually having the support and the mechanisms in place to enable that to happen. I mean, some of our customers, for example, have increased their internal mobility or succession of internal moves from 0% to 40% by actually integrating and putting everything together for them, and us bringing that capability. And that is where broader kind of cost or value is derived from, as opposed to just making the process more efficient.
And how about doing both? There are companies now that aim at just sourcing candidates, so they don't do the recruiting; they just do the sourcing. So they deliver the candidates, and then the internal recruitment department takes over, and they do the rest of the process.
Well, I agree with you that it's all part of one journey. That's the danger, and I think you can do that. But I think from the moment you interact with a candidate, that's part of your brand right there. So having one person doing one part and then moving to another person, you've got to be very careful how that works.
Some of it's about evolution. I completely agree. I think if you ask any outsource organisation, they'd want to take accountability of everything and be held to that, because then you can really deliver. Whereas if you hand off partway through, you then have this kind of refereeing of responsibility. That said, part of outsourcing is scalability. So often it's that you may have an extremely well-honed model and process, but you can't have 6 people on the bench when times are quiet. So how do you leverage certain support at the right moments from a partner you trust to be able to help you? And that could one day turn into full outsource, or it may actually move back. But it's how you leverage different things for the candidate experience. So those handoffs become less important if overall you're able to respond and be responsive to candidates and have that reflect positively on your brand. So some of it will always be the engineering of how that works. And the other piece I wanted to kind of pose as a question was, having an outsource partner gives you an external lens on the marketplace and some benchmarks outside of your world. So there's an element of being able to, if you really involve them in your strategic workforce planning, in your business plan, they can give you the lens to the market that says, I realise you're expanding into Guatemala, but actually the skill base there means this, this and this to your business plan. And we have other client stories or other things to be able to share with you that can shape your thinking. So there are very few relationships that get to that level, but that is the next generation of value that you get from an external partner, I guess, in being able to utilise what they know in an environmental scan of the marketplace.
I challenge that, because I think any good recruitment agency would be delighted to go in and talk to any client if they were given the opportunity to talk about the marketplace, macro trends, because it's an in with the client. So I think you will get that anyway. But I'm not saying it's not a value, but I think you can get that without RPO. You can get. Can I pose a challenging question for the RPOs, which is one of their biggest points, and we've done RPO as well, and we're also an agency, is that it's this, we save costs. But there are lots of ways where the metrics aren't always exactly what you think they are. So for instance, the time to hire is shorter because the time to hire only happens when there's a sign-off, but there's 6 or 7 days that have happened before the sign-off where they've got all the information. So this 28 days is actually really 35 days. The cost per hire doesn't take into, we also charge you for the technology, and we've also got a margin on top of this. And there's lots of other ways RPOs are making money, which is not as cost effective, but actually what they're much better at doing than corporates out there is actually analyzing where the costs are. And I think that's the challenge for corporates. You are paying more than you think you're paying, I think, in general. And I still think it's the right amount of money, but I think some RPOs are, I'm not going to name names, but I know there's one that would get challenged in Ireland because their cost is not their cost. And they go in at a low cost, but actually when you take all the add-ons afterwards and you see what you get at the end, it ends up being something else. And I think that there's going to need to be more transparency of an overall cost figure, not this is how much we're going to save you, because they say your current recruitment fees are X, we're going to bring to that. But actually when they added in all the other things, whether it's an in-house recruiter that they're paying for and the technology, it's not really the saving, but they're still the ones giving them the metrics. So procurement are happy because this is what they're seeing. And I don't know, for those of you in RPO, I mean, I think that is a challenge that corporates are going, as they get savvier, because they've got much savvier around sourcing. So they're now saying, recruitment agents, we will use you, but you better be good. Whereas before we didn't know what we were doing and we just used everybody. They're probably going to say the same about RPOs now.
No, it's a fair challenge. I think the the conversation with the customer often starts from a point of view where they're not really clear on what their baseline costs are. So there's a lot of work to be done to kind of like define the business case up front, and therefore actually say, well, what is the opportunity cost of not only the direct cost, but also the indirect cost and the broader value you're potentially going to be offering to them. But also, I think that the whole kind of notion of just focusing on cost per hire per se and as an acquisition cost is convenient for many stakeholders because it is something which you can hang your hat on. It's black and it's white and it's theoretically measurable, even if there's some challenges around it that you've described. But a challenge to the industry and the kind of function of talent acquisition is how do you define the value of some of those broader outcomes which you're delivering, be it around some of the basics of time, but also into the slightly more nebulous world of quality, which we know is actually where the value lies, but actually how do you pinpoint some of that? That's a problem. And if as a broad function, we can actually get better at defining what that value is, both to the customer and also from the provider side, then everyone has a much richer conversation in terms of actually what you're trying to achieve and how you can go about doing it.
Question,
Sorry,
is whether that conversation reaches that level, and I would say that happens maybe in a fraction of cases, that it actually is taken to that higher level, because it is seen as a transactional, scalable, cost efficient, convenient solution, rather than, well, how is this going to make us a sustainable company, taking it to the next level? And I don't necessarily see that happening, and being on both sides of the fence, that there is that opportunity to take it to that level. And I think that's the problem, is that it's actually what I want to be, but I don't think it happens very often.
Some of it's, actually we ran this track a few months ago at the last truLondon, and it was interesting that in the room everybody said, yeah, I'd outsource payroll. I don't today, but I'd outsource payroll. Recruitment, they were like, don't know. And I think a lot of it's around trust. So for some reason there was more trust in the payroll outsource, that it's so tangible. It's quite scientific. You can nail down all the pieces that you want to work. Although it's massive pain if it doesn't, because if people don't get paid correctly, forget your candidate experience. That's really going to go somewhere. So the view was, so you would outsource potentially the most emotional thing that happens in the process, but not recruitment. So I think it's incumbent on organisations and providers to start to define what the value is, where the trust is in what you're actually buying into. So you build your business case. That becomes your contract. You sign off on the baseline benchmarks and where you're going and what that partnership's going to mean. Because I think you're right, we aspire to do so much, and I think that a lot of the RPO providers out there can do it. But at the same time, you're relying on the customer being able to step up and have a view, a plan, and share that partnership. And that's where I think everybody can move forward in a way that would leverage what's out there. And provide that level of support, because sometimes if you want in-house recruiters, that attracts a different type of person to someone who might come into an RPO. So actually, what's the best in class? What is it that you really want to get from a partner, and where are your gaps or areas you want to handle from a client perspective? And it could be a piece of the process or something more end-to-end. But there is, done well, it will all feel good to a candidate. So, and it's how each organisation leverages those partners to do it.
But from a client point of view, if you look at the ultimate client CEO and they're looking at any outsourcing model and they aren't looking at cost, they're looking at strategy and the more strategic side, the only thing they're going to care about is, are you going to deliver me more profit to the bottom line, which means revenue, shareholder value. So you could argue it would be a very risky thing to do potentially, that the RPO business that said, we will measure part of our success based on shareholder value, because essentially if you get the best talent in here, you will have brilliant shareholder value. Whereas if we just get people and fill the vacancies, but they're average and no better than you do yourself, you're just going to keep trotting along the bottom. There's lots of arguments to say, well, what happens if the CEO goes off the rails and everything else goes wrong? So you wouldn't link everything to it. But it would be a very strong message to say that the only real measure, because you can't measure it by, well, we've got 5 years of retention, because you may not want 5 years of retention. It's very difficult to measure how good people are, because it's based on the person you didn't get versus this person, or benchmarking your organization. It's very different. But you can measure it on, this is our current shareholder value, this is where we are now, or if it's a private company, something else. But that's potentially where a company could really impress. Even if honestly, if it didn't even get down to that because the company didn't know how to measure it, to even say you would do that is almost highlighting that we're really looking for the best people, not just for people to fill your jobs.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's kind of the end state where you want to get to. I mean, there is possibilities in workforce segments within an organisation to understand what is the value those roles per se are bringing. Sales is a great example, right? We can actually put some dollar figures on a role, and then start to link the success and potentially the commercials around the RPO engagement to that, and that really starts to put the focus in a different area. Because the issue is, if you're only talking about the cost of acquisition, the amount of interest which a CEO has in that at the end of the day is not great, because as an overall cost of their business, it's still pretty fractional. But if you can actually bring it to something which is more impacting performance of their business, then all of a sudden you have a much bigger conversation.
I know, sorry, because you wanted to.
I just want to take you up on the subject of the difference between whether you go direct into an organisation or you go via an RPO, and the skill level, if you want to say, call it that. What I am astounded about is that if you look at various forums, if you look at where the discussion is really happening, I hate to say, but I don't really see the RPOs being particularly well presented, or speaking out, or having a voice, or saying something, or driving the agenda. And if you are in an organisation that is going out to organisations and selling yourself on, we are the experts in this area, then surely you would expect them to be in the discussion groups, in the forums, in the driving the agenda in various ways. And I don't see it. I don't see it on ERE. I don't see it on various other forums, and that worries me deeply. Because I don't see that, and I've seen it from the organisation I worked in. I was not inspired or impressed with the people I was working with in terms of pushing the agenda.
Interesting point. And I was actually referring to sources, because the interesting thing about some of the really talented sources that have been attracted to our organisation have actually wanted the challenge and the variety that comes with multiple client challenges, and I think that attracts a different kind of individual that sees that as being something they really want to excel at, and that's exactly where we've got involved with the RE. So we've had our Centre of Excellence teams actually get involved in leading the agenda around sourcing, around candidate experience, and building the white papers and the research that says, what does the next big thing look like? And I think that's where some of these characters and these talented individuals see that they can spread their wings a little bit more in an environment where their set of challenges is going to be very varied. Because the challenge always within an in-house team is, how do you keep your recruiters engaged and interested in the proposition that doesn't always change that much over time? You know, the organisation is what it is. So how do you keep them motivated? But I think you make a good point that beyond that, I think there's not enough of a voice. And actually, that's a sad thing, because I think there's a lot that can be shared and said, and there's a lot of benchmarking and market data that partners can put out there that actually would give everybody a better idea of what good looks like.
So if I was a client, and I had a little bit of insight into this, I would challenge an organisation and say, okay, well, so where are you pushing the agenda? Where are you? Because if you look at the various events or what have you, it is rarely the RPOs that stand up and say, do you know what, this is the latest development, or this is what we think, or this is how we like to push the agenda, this, that, the other. And I just find it a bit interesting that that's not the case.
I suppose what we're doing now is the start of things to come. So this is, the outsourcers being involved in things like Tru is quite new. And actually it was very hard for kind of the unconference environment to say, actually, how does outsourcing fit within that? So I actually think it's hugely positive that, one, we're having this discussion, and we're doing it live as well, but also that is, and we're actually doing it in a way that we're sat together. There's a bunch of providers who all at some point would compete to actually start to push the conversation on from, actually, is it cheaper, is it faster, to what else is there? How does that work? So I completely accept what you're saying, and I think that we are on the way to having a different kind of voice.
I guess it's challenging. I'm not sure I fully agree. I mean, we develop a lot of IP, a lot of thinking on white papers, all the rest of it. We do a lot of events, both hosted on our own and going to others. But I think the challenge is maybe it's not reaching the right people. You know, if you're saying you're not seeing it, you're doing it, but it's just, or it's maybe not relevant, so it's not connecting with you around something that's of interest, and it's being.
No. I am on every single, you know, global forum you can imagine, 100-odd blogs, posts, and I just don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't see the RPOs, and yet I see that RPOs it's growing, developing, this, that, the other. I also see, you know, some clients won, some clients lost, you know, and I'm thinking to myself, hang on a second, if you're so good at what you're doing, and if you are the ones who are pushing the agenda, why are you then being chucked?
Well, I think it depends on the objectives for it in the first place. So if it was to come in and hold a steady fort for a long period of time without any innovation from the provider, then yeah, they will get chucked. The other approach, maybe they wanted them to come in and build some capability with an intention to transition. That's certainly an objective which we often go into with our customers. So an end outcome may have been chucked if you were seeing it from an outsourcing perspective, but if you're seeing it more as a part to build capability, naturally being chucked is the outcome.
But surely any provider's biggest you know, job is to make themselves indispensable.
It depends how you go about reaching that objective. Not necessarily. No. So if you take the traditional outsourcing model, it's yes, we want to get revenue from a customer for as long as possible. If you take more the consulting mindset to it, then it's actually about delivering an outcome for a customer. So potentially they are self-sustainable. Again, it's just a mindset of what you're going into in the first place.
Yeah.
I've just had a quick question for you in terms of where within your talent acquisition process now do you have any kind of partner? Because I think some of this comes back to our level of trust in the different elements and where you're leveraging third parties and where that really works for you or not.
Yeah, and by partner you mean third party?
Yeah, it could be assessment and selection, it could be that you do use agencies at times to support on a contingent basis. So where is it that there's external partners in that?
Well, we have in our strategy, and I'm currently at Sonos, we have decided to do a lot of the sourcing ourselves.
Okay.
So we do the sourcing, the recruiting, and we do use tools to support that. So video pre-selection and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But we do all the sourcing ourselves from beginning to the end. We don't believe that we need third parties to do that. What we have done within the companies, we have created a culture of, well, really everyone is a talent sourcer. So we do a lot of things with referrals. We have a great referral program. I think we do between 40 and 50% of our hires we do with referrals. Mm-hmm. So that is amazing. Mm-hmm. It's really amazing.
And how long have you been in that role? Just in terms of how long, what's the legacy of how it's changed? Because what you're describing is so many organisations are aspiring to, but they haven't got there yet. So.
I've been in that role as a recruiter for 14 months now, mm-hmm. And we are building the talent acquisition department at the moment. I think we're doing great things, but key to that is that we think that talent is absolutely crucial for our success. Mm-hmm. Costs are relevant, of course, but we measure quality of hire and we measure candidate experience. Those are the two key measurements that we have in talent acquisitions. And of course, we measure other things as well, but those two are really crucial.
What's the actual metric for candidate experience? What do you actually measure? So what's on a report?
We ask our candidates how they have experienced their visit to our office, and they can give 3 answers to that. So we get a percentage out of that, and we get a 95 positive candidate experience out of that. We also use a metric called NPS, which is a Net Promoter Score. That is very well known within customer loyalty, and that gives us great insight in how we perform in candidate experience, and we're doing really well. Yeah.
Just to be contentious for a minute, I think when organisations get to a stage where they've built that platform, they've built that model, they've got a strong culture of talent scouting within the business, I would question the value from an RPO as well, to be honest, because if you did want someone, it's almost just providing some resource to help develop the model you've already.
Yeah, I think most companies who decide to use RPO do that because they want to reduce costs. I think.
Yeah, normally there are. Yeah, there is an element that's broken within it somewhere along the line, and usually because it's broken somewhere along the line, costs have spiraled out of control because they've relied upon third-party agencies. That's normally kind of the cause and effect.
Cost is key, but that said, there are so many clients out there that don't have the scale that you would ever really take the level of cost out that would be of interest to a CEO. So it becomes about something else, and part of the economic climate has meant a lot of organisations have completely scaled down their in-house recruitment team. And to rebuild that and to put the fixed cost behind it is really challenging. So how do you leverage a partner that gets you there faster to a place where you feel you've got that comfort? And the environment you're describing is exactly where either RPO or in-house is successful, where the CEO and the top table feel it's important.
Absolutely.
So where
it comes right from the CEO.
It comes right from the top, and then actually almost regardless of whether you outsource or not, everybody has stated their vision and their agenda around talent. And I think quite often RPO either doesn't work or you move on because actually there was never really that talent acquisition agenda on the table. Because so many CEOs say talent's really important, but they don't necessarily know how that's then translated into what they do.
And the thing is, what you do is you know, by knowing that that is your culture, you also start hiring the people that can live with that culture and that embrace that culture. So by that, you already start hiring people that are talent scouts. And you know what they say: if you hire B players, they start bringing B and C players. So we're aiming for top 8 talent. That's what we do. And these are the people that inspire us as a recruiter to find the best talent out there as well.
And how are you measuring quality at the moment? Because it's a really interesting point, because there's almost the time to competency or your first
What we
performance
do
review.
is we have a what we call it sort of a quality of hire measurement, and that is it's more like a pilot at the moment. So, and what we do, we have like 3 questions as well for the hiring managers and the co-workers of the person that we've hired, and we simply ask them, so are you satisfied with the time that the person came up to speed in his work? Would you hire him again? Questions like that. And these are really simple answers, but that gives a really good indication of the quality of the hire.
Okay, so it's still quite subjectively objective, if I can describe it that way. So you've got measures, but
what you do, you ask 5 to 7 people to do that. So that gives you a really good indication. So we're building a base there at the moment, and probably from there we will,
Your passion is quite obvious, and it's probably why the referral system is working. And why
I think that's one reason, and that's not only with me, that's with everyone we have hired.
How does an RPO bring that kind of level of passion to compete with
my question.
It still, I think, relates to how evolved the organisation is. So quite often, from an HR function, resourcing is not the most attractive area of that. If you're mapping out your HR career, you might be drawn towards transformation or to org design, and so you actually get HR generalists working in resourcing that really aren't that comfortable with how much they need to be front and centre in what's quite a sales relationship with the candidate. So sometimes that database of applicants will grow and grow, and the other things will be prioritised because they're actually not that comfortable doing that candidate engagement piece. So that's when actually a partner who has that track record can come in and bring and fill that gap and do that quite quickly. So outsourcing can accelerate the pace of change, and it depends on where the organisation's at to how much they can leverage that. Whereas if you've already got that team and that passion, then actually you might be more inclined to look at it more as a scalability thing if you've got a particular volume need in the moment. But that's sometimes where you can really get that partner to come in and have true recruiters come in and accelerate what kind of been quite a slow process.
And I think the difference as well is with a RPO, you have a third party helping you with your requisitions, your vacancies that you have. I think if you do that yourself in-house, you do that differently. What we're doing now is we know the people before we need them, so we start building a network before we even have the vacancies. So that will help us in speeding up as soon as we have the vacancies, because we already know the people out there that we that we think are interesting for our business.
Can I add, so that you use the word partnering, right? And there's a lot of talk in RPOs about partnering with clients. Absolutely agree. But one of the things I would see from the flip side is a new RPO provider comes in, you go out to 5 or 10 recruitment agencies and go this way or the highway. So firstly, there's no partnering. You have to do it this way. You have to fill out forms. We're not going to listen to any feedback how you want to do it. This is how we do it across the world. So you do this or you leave. So my first view would be, you're probably not going to get the best recruiters to work for you, and you're going to say we're only going to work at X%, and therefore you're going to get. So there's a bit of a view of, well, we treat our recruitment agencies with disdain, therefore we get cheap. And guess what? You get with cheap, you don't get the best talent. And I would be always interested that the partnership RPOs talk about, I'm not sure there's a real partnership with the people who actually can provide them with the best candidates. Because I would still say the agencies are more independent even with the RPOs, because even the RPOs go on site, they're suddenly saying, why aren't we getting the best talent? We have an incredible brand, and people externally going, no, you don't. You do 8 interviews, you take 17 weeks to hire, but you think that's a good process. But I don't see the partnering on that side. And that's your source. And they kind of go, we don't need agencies, we can do it ourselves. And I always think, even to have that as an assumption is a bad place to start, because it's almost, well, so for generations this is how it's been done, but we can change all that and do it our way. I don't know if you think that, but that's what that would be an agency view. That it's this way, we're not going to listen, we don't need your advice, and we do it better than you. And by the way, we've hired a recruitment agency person, so therefore we know all your tricks. And you're going, well, I'm not sure that's the case.
I think it's a fair challenge, and as far as partnering should go both ways. That's a very fair point. I think in our experience, there is usually a reasonable chunk of recruitment demand in an organisation that is well serviced by a direct sourcing method. You can find as good or better talent through utilising the brand as you could through other channels. There is usually always a segment or a number of segments that are very niche, very specialist, where a partner, an agency partner, is absolutely integral. It's probably not 20 or 30 of them, it's probably 3 to 5. And in our experience, those have actually become very close partners. A challenge back maybe is in an agency, if you're sitting in an environment where you are quite a generic agency, yes, you may get that experience because actually people are struggling to see the value. If you're a niche agency really servicing vertical, then they're going to need you because they are going to not be able to source them through another channel. So, sort of both sides of that argument.
Yeah, I suppose it's one of the metrics you hear from some RPOs. We don't use agencies. And they look at that as a badge of honor, a positive. And I'd always say that's probably one of your biggest failures, because if you're not using agencies, you're saying we have the best recruiters and we can find the best talent. And I don't think anyone should ever feel that way, because you've already lost if you're thinking we don't need to use third parties.
The ultimate measure of success is the quality of talent which you brought into the organisation, right? And then from understanding that, you need to look back and say, well, where has that come from? And in the most part, there's usually a good chunk of that comes through direct sourcing. When we look at the data, we can see that. But starting from that mindset of we know that's going to be the case, that's where you can come unstuck. So I do understand your point.
Does the pressure on RPOs to reduce their cost of hire sometimes preclude the use of agencies? Do they sometimes?
Yes, it does.
And then you miss out on.
And I think there's a challenge back to the customer as well. This goes right way back to the value that you're selling. And the customer saying, if it's all about cost, then the RPO is obviously under pressure to structure the deal as such that it will reduce the risk to the customer around cost. Okay. If you're going into relationships that it's all about getting the best quality talent, and the capability we're bringing is more than just reducing the cost, then it gives you the opportunity to structure the deal in such a way that there's more transparency around that to all parties.
But I think it comes back to your point around pipelining. So if you set up an RPO and you set it on transactions, and the RPO doesn't breathe or get out of bed until there's an approved requisition, you will always react.
Dead.
So you might have a database, you might be keeping them warm, but you're not really talking to them as a trusted advisor in the process.
Because you don't get paid for that.
Exactly.
Well, that depends.
But that's what I mean.
Depends,
The commercial model needs to reflect what you want. So if you're going to talent pipeline, it's not about charging per transaction, it's about the overall service and putting some marks in the sand for
and
that.
we've seen a big shift in our customers actually in the last couple of years that have been more longer sighted in their view, shifting the commercial model quite dramatically, where we actually get paid and KPI'd on building pipelines, availability and engagement of talent in readiness for.
How does that look?
Yeah.
Explain to me, and maybe to people watching that, because what does that mean? Because I understand in my own mind what that means, but I don't think having a talent pipeline ready, is that anything more than just saying, here are people who could work for us, but we're not ready to hire them? So what is that?
It's three things. So it starts with a workforce plan, or strategic workforce plan, to a view of what the organisation is going to need in the future, and the level or ability for a organisation to do that is very variable. Okay, so there's kind of a dependency to say there needs to be a level of understanding of what's going to be required. It then goes into a case of actually, obviously identifying those relevant people, building a relationship with them, and then building some engagement to them to whatever extent is relevant. So usually in an organisation there are kind of broad talent pools. We're going to need 100 finance people, for example, in the next year, and you may have a lower level of engagement with than, for example, we're going to need 10 super duper salespeople that have these very specialist skills. There's only 10 of them in the market, and the engagement approach to that smaller population will be much more hands-on, much more one-to-one, much more kind of meeting them for coffee type stuff, as opposed to the broader finance group, which will be more driven through community activity and more of a technology-led engagement or community approach. So that's normally how it's broken. It's kind of segmented, and there's never one size fits all. It's understanding what the customer is going to from the plan and where the real business critical areas are for their organisation.
So what do you do with the people that you find that don't fit in that workforce plan?
Inevitably, there is always a level of waste. Inevitably, there's always a level of art beyond the science, because very rarely, in fact, still to see it, has an organisation said this is our workforce plan and 100% of that playing out. There is always a level.
No, I was referring to the really talented that you don't have already in that workforce plan. So there's no need for these people, but still you find them, talented people, and you think as a third party that person could really contribute well to the needs.
Yeah, so some organisations, some customers are they recognise it's a niche skill, and they would create opportunities in that business for that individual.
So you craft the job around.
Yeah, effectively. And it depends on the organisation, it depends on their level of growth, it depends on their desire to really get that capability on board. Others, being frank, say, yes, this is what we want to do, and then struggle to actually make it happen. Budgets get in the way, other priorities get in the way, etc. So I wouldn't say every organisation can be taking the same approach, and sometimes, frankly, it is a bit of learning. But if you're not coming from that mindset where you're helping the organisation proactively get its unfair share of talent, you're always going to be behind.
That's the point around direct sourcing versus RPO that some people say. So it'd be interesting your view is. I had an experience with two companies, Google and Microsoft. I won't say which is which. So basically, a candidate came to me who's a friend of mine who just says, "I'd love to work for one of those two companies." So I happen to know. That one of the senior directors in there said, "This isn't me looking for a fee. This is just a friend. Here you go. They're really interested and they're very good." His response was, "Oh, I'll send that to a recruiter." And then the recruiter came back and said, "We're not hiring." And then he went to the other company, and someone did meet them, and he's now working. He's one of the most incredible. He's just a great person to have working for you. But there's this challenge that a lot of companies, well, we're not ready to hire, and it's this. Well, you're not going to find the best people the day you want to find them. They're going to come to you at different times, and I think that's what a lot of people find tricky. So from people's candidate experiences, "I'd love to work for your company," and someone goes, "Right, send me through your CV." Go, "No, I'm not really at that stage. I want to explore an opportunity with a senior person." They go, "Well, we don't have time for that."
Absolutely.
But that's not really about outsourcing versus not. I think that's a common problem. It's that whether you're an in-house or an out-house, your immediate reaction is pass it to them. Because actually, as the hiring manager, you don't hire that often, you're not that comfortable, but you really do need to leverage your network. So talent relationship management, whether it's an RPO or in-house, you've got to help your senior leaders engage with talent and meet someone for a coffee who they might not hire for 12 months.
The question would be, is it easier to do that in-house? So where the sources are saying, building that culture, whereas I think there's a bit more of a challenge for the RPO, because you can't tell a business what to do, but you do have to engage with them. They may not let you do that.
Two points on that. I think one is how the RPO is perceived to the business, and our desire in most cases we're successful that the business isn't aware that it's not an employee of that organisation that is in the recruiting department. And secondly, it's how the objectives of that team, and this can be in an RPO context, the contract is defined and what is to be delivered. Because we've found where organisations have an in-sourced capability, if I can describe it that way, the size of the team is normally cut to the cloth with regards to the number of recs they have. So when they get busy, they're busy delivering recs, all of the pipeline gets forgotten about, it gets quiet, they go back to the pipeline, but lo and behold, they don't need it because the recs aren't there now. Whereas we take quite deliberate steps to separate our sourcing function capability from our sort of rec management people, if I can describe it that way. And those people are focused in the most part on proactively building pipelines for now and also the future. So it's not perfect, no one get it 100%, but it certainly allows us to put the right investment in the right place.
And some of this links back to the candidate experience. So I actually think RPO hasn't embraced enough managing agencies, and our supply development program is acknowledgement of the fact that 100% direct sourcing, that I challenge any organisation to run that way and really be able to react, because sometimes agencies provide a quality contingent database that you pay more for because it's in the moment support. The nerves I have around the candidate experience is the more that any number of suppliers are engaged, the more chance is that one candidate's going to get 5 calls from everyone telling them a different story about the organisation, and it's how you have that lens on the process to really make sure it works. So I would advocate some key agency partners that are in the fold, that get the feedback direct, where you host a call with them and the hiring manager, and you build those relationships and you identify your high-risk roles where you're going to need support, but do it in a scientific way so that candidates don't start to question the strategy of the organisation, because they're getting all these mixed messages in the marketplace. So I think there's a real balance there. But suppliers, it's essential that they feel engaged in the model, particularly at the outset, because you can't just switch on a new strategy and not then have business as usual still have a need. So there's no moratorium. It's not like everything stops. So there's always better ways of doing things, and some of that is about the supply of great talent. And if you link it to quality and to shareholder value, you actually leave your partners to worry about how that's done and how that works, and you're not in the weeds of trying to run it for them. You're simply holding them to this kind of utopia name in the whole thing.
But I think there are ways around that, whereby I've been in this situation with agencies, and I was concerned about the message they were sending out to candidates. So I, as an end client, put something together that I demanded that the agent sent out to the candidates, which was exactly how I, as an organisation, end client, wanted to be portrayed. This was exactly what the process was going to be. So I didn't want the agencies to hold that responsibility or to present the organisation the way that they believed it should be presented. So I took over that relationship, and with that I also created a relationship with the candidate, by which I said, if there's any issues, then here is someone in the organisation that you've been supplied to that has your interest.
But I could see though, you telling a recruiter to do that, it may not work as well. It's like, rather than you talking and selling the role, give them a piece of paper because I don't trust. What they might hear is, I don't trust the way you're going to do it, so give it to them. That's how they may feel about it, which again is also part of the candidate experience. You might give them everything perfect to read, but actually people will remember the tone of the person's voice and how excited they are about selling you the role. And I think that's
absolutely. And what I'm referring to here is something which happens at submission level. Okay, so at submission stage, that's when this happens. But again, it's about, if you are using outside partners, it is that they are equipped to actually present the organisation the way you want the organisation to be perceived.
All too often, the employers don't give that message to the agencies, and you can ask 100 times and they still won't give you enough information. So it's actually, if I was the recruiter in that situation, I'd actually like getting that.
Well, I think there's 2 levels of information typically, isn't there? There's the corporate picture of what's the organisation about, and to your point, I mean, you can position it more as here's a toolkit to help you communicate that to candidates rather than something which you must force upon them. But then secondly, there's usually a bit more specific about the role, the context of the department, the opportunity value proposition as opposed to the employer value proposition, which does usually require more insight, typically from the hiring manager or someone that's close to that part of the business. And I think that is become more and more of an issue for agencies, because the number of steps, if you like, between that end user and them has typically increased, and the ability for them to get high quality information and therefore effectively position that message to the candidate has become a struggle as well. And that's something we've, in the niches and the segments where we do need agencies, we've tried to work hard to close that gap again and really give them that knowledge, because otherwise the value added becomes more watered down.
If we come back to the issue of outsource or direct, I'd say that the crux of the whole thing really lies in the people you have fronting it, because we can talk about the processes and the abilities and the reporting and all those kind of things. It is the people on a daily basis that sit and the front it, that the client sees and the client interacts with, and those are the ones who will make or break this relationship, success. And the way I have done it as a third party in an organization is that I have totally, become one with the organization, and that's where you pick up the nuances. That's where you pick up the stories. That's where you pick up the ability to sell the organization or the role or the nuances of the whole thing.
So how did you do that?
Well,
how did you do that to become one with them?
There was a full acceptance and willingness from the organization to do that.
Right.
And I realized that if I am to do the best I can possibly do in my role, then I have to do that. So there was no distinction between whether I was a third-party supplier or I was an in-house individual. And that is, to me, that is the only way that you can truly make this a success. If you are to be in a third party, to be kept at arm's length is no good. And particularly, if you look at the whole thing from a holistic perspective, where everything hangs together, there's the referral side of things, there's the EVP, there's the marketing, there's the branding, those things. It has to be very, very much, entwined with each other, because if it isn't, then the process will break down somewhere.
I think it's more linked to the stated strategy. For me, a really good litmus test, if you had an HR conference every year, would you, for 1 minute, let's say it's in-house, there's no chance of them turning around and saying, by the way, you guys aren't coming, because you're an integral part of it. But more often than not, your RPO provider wouldn't be there. And actually, they're just part of HR, just like everyone else, if that's where it sits. So I think it's, if you ask yourself those questions, that's a definition between partnership and transaction, that you see them needing to understand your agenda, to be excited about the business and how you want to move forward, versus just knowing what they know in the moment every day. So, and a lot of that's about the stated direction of the business rather than whether you've used a third party or not, because typically they won't even look and feel like a third party. They'll have a business card like everyone else. So when you're saying to them, advising the business on, here's a great candidate, I think you should see them, they're not thinking, what do you know? They're thinking, you're my recruitment function. Yeah. And it's hard to get there, but actually shoulder to shoulder, it's no problem. But you just have to have the same objectives going into it, and the commercial setup and the agreement and the framework that means that you can work that way, because you can talk that and then revert back to transactions in the way the model's described. So you're only
getting that level, if you win their trust, and it is about and that's why it is a question of being there, listening, and having access to all areas, and because without access to all areas, forget it, you can't do it.
And delivery.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's the table stake, right?
Yeah.
And then the rest of it, I got it.
I think we've probably come to a natural point, unless there's anything else anyone wants to raise. Okay, thank you very much.